it was very, very difficult for us to think through going back to those places. And so I think that that's one of the things I want to just make sure we point a light to. I think that we've seen not only in hip hop culture and in other places where we're being inspired to say, oh, like, Hove has the line with the whole, gentrify your hood before they do or whatever. But the mindset really there, and I'm sure y'all probably brought that up at some point, is that the mindset is really more about, well, buy when the assets are low. Where are the assets low? In places that the community investment isn't done well, or where those communities traditionally where Black and Brown people have been living for decades. So buy where those assets are low and invest in them. And we know that as cities become bigger and the city metropolitan center is expanding out farther to outreaching suburbs, especially as we see transit being improved, we're going to see the value of those traditionally Black and Brown communities get pushed out. I know that y'all are talking about what's happening in the Bay Area, and it's happening here in Texas. It's definitely happening in the Southeast in Atlanta. And so I think that we're seeing this mindset change more now, where more of us are thinking about ownership mindset, the ability to invest in lower cost assets, knowing that if it's a buy and hold, we're going to have opportunity to grow with it. But I just think that part of it is, yes, we left, but I think the other part is it was kind of not our fault that we left, given what the burden was, like what the task was. And so now I think we're in a position to do better now that we know better. But I do think that in general, we just need to be mindful of, yes, we played a role in this in the past, and what can we do to improve it? And so, to the question, I think that it's bad if we don't acknowledge the role that we play in it, and I think it's bad if we continue to use the same practices that we used 20 and 25 years ago, and just continue to just leave our communities and never go back and don't invest back into them. So I think in those cases, gentrification is bad if we don't acknowledge the opportunities to really improve those communities ourselves.
Thank you for sharing that, Harold. As always, you have something really great and profound to say. I do want to add, though, that, I don't know if you're familiar with Market Watch. I'm sure you are, probably way more than I am. But they actually published an article recently that stated that Black home ownership rates hit the lowest level since the 1960s, and that was unlikely to change in the pandemic year too. So I hear what you're saying. I think there's just like many different layers to it. You brought up Jay-Z. I know he lamented about the fact that one of his songs that he could have bought, the building that he lived in, 550 State Street, for like a really low amount of price. And then he said he felt like Dumbo. So you do have some really valid points there. And I think, when we talk about some of the properties that are inherited, the taxes and all of those other bills, they can become quite a burden on someone who's not in a position to be able to afford it. But I did want to add that Black people, do own less than we've ever have. And someone kind of like hit me with this point that hip hop has a lot of these folks like fucked up. So I guess when you're getting your education from songs and not really, and I will say that we aren't really educated in this country. Like our schools are definitely not teaching us about um, generational wealth and ownership, because they need to keep some people workers and cheap, right? I saw Denise unmute, so it looks like you wanted to pop in and say something.
Yeah. And I think we have to make sure we're grounded in reality, right? Like, I'm so glad you made that point about like home ownership. We're also so disproportionately burdened with student loan debt. We're starting businesses, but those businesses are not getting the funding that they need, so they're not generating the same revenue of our, like, there's so many places, right? And I think, again, I keep using this word punctuation, like where you start the story really matters. The top 1% of wealth in the United States, it's about 1.2 million households. The top 1% is 96.1% white. 96.1% white. So I just want us to be really careful that we don't kind of like minimize the serious challenge. Like you mentioned, being able to pay the taxes. I know so many people that are pushed out. They just couldn't afford the taxes. They wanted to hold on, but they couldn't. Right. And I just think that we have to be like, yes, I always think we have to be responsible as a community, but is our community responsible to us? Is our government responsible to us? I mean, haven't, like, Black people have paid so much and done so much. At one point, do we hold them accountable to protect us as a workforce, to protect our ability to have some place to live? Like, yes, we can all do better, we can all do more, but at what point? I guess I want the same protections that gentrifiers get, and we just don't get those. I'm not, again, anybody who knows me knows I'm not anti-white, I'm not anti, like, of course not, of course not. What I am is pro protecting communities that have just gone unprotected for so long. I mean, I got two brothers, and stop and frisk was crazy when I was growing. It was crazy, right? But we have you ever seen a movie about Wall Street that didn't talk about drugs? They never did stop and frisk on Wall Street. And I think that we really underestimate the damage that all of these policies have had in these communities to break them down, and that we criticize them because they're broken down. And I just want to be really, really careful about that. Yes, there's opportunities for us to do something different, but I think sometimes we forget that we're making bricks without straw. We're making bricks without straw, and we need to be supported and supportive of people that are really just doing the best that they can.
Denise, mother effing Hamilton. Thank you for that. Listen, guys, we are going to, oh, go ahead, Harold. I'm going to let you speak. If anyone else has any last words before I go to the panelists who all have been modded, I would like to
Yeah,
close out with our panelists. But if anyone else has something to add before we wrap, Harold, go for it. And
yeah, I'll say this
I'm
real
sorry,
quick.
I know there's a couple people who've just
Okay.
popped in. You guys have missed the bulk of the conversation, but obviously we're talking about, is gentrification really that bad? This conversation was spurred by the fact that I got to listen to this wonderful new scripted podcast called The Lower Bottoms. And it is actually the first scripted podcast project from Will Packer Media Productions. So I'm really grateful to have them, the director, Shayla, who's one of the producers, all here with us today. So Harold, please make your point, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just say this part real quick, and that so completely agree with Denise. There are systemic issues and infrastructure issues that are creating the plight that exists. And to the point that you made, Tony, about the market numbers. So assuming that those two things are the case, so you got systemic issues and infrastructure issues, and then you also have the market issues where it's basically outlining and describing our actions. Black people are not buying homes at that rate, or how at this low rate. Is that, well then well then what do we look at, right? So someone's going to buy these houses, and if we look at it and say, well, we just don't have money, or if we do have the money, we want to go live in these other communities because whatever. I'm just saying that at that point we've got to figure out how we start to shift that tide where more people are thinking, even if you're not buying the house to live in it, you're thinking about it from an investment standpoint. And so I think that we are at a turning point. As a person who, trust me, I've had a conversation about, should housing be viewed as a consumption product the same way that we view like gasoline for our car. That's something I talk about a good bit on social. So I'd love to have the conversation continue or join the next time y'all do it, because I do think sometimes we need to look at this and saying, every house you buy isn't an investment property. And sometimes, due to a lot of the issues with redlining and interest rates that are predatory to Black people and people of color, buying a home isn't in everyone's best interest. And so I just know that there has to be a shift in the mindset to change those numbers, and understanding the infrastructure that we're dealing with what's going on is just the first step to making sure we come up with our own game plan to save our own community. But I appreciate you having me up here, Tony, and Shayla and Dominique and Denise and Steve and everybody. This has been dope. I'm glad I caught the tail end of it.